Francisco events that will go on. The ban on bottled water sales had the added bonus of helping preserve the health of the bay, as waterfront breezes have a bad habit of picking up anything not nailed down and depositing them in the water. Because plastic doesn't biodegrade, it breaks down into smaller particles that pollute delicate ecosystems and harm animals who ingest the plastic thinking that it's food. Faced with a ban on bottled water, the organizers of America's Cup and other events set up water stations where attendees could refill their own canteens with clean San Francisco tap water pulled from nearby fire hydrants. To make this possible for the other large events moving forward, the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission is inventorying hydrants near the city's most used properties to make it easier for organizers to access potable water for the events. The average what they did have run into some problems with, the city council, was the beverage industry. They are opposed to this ban. They came to hearings and talked about the advancements that they've made and how there's now less virgin plastic in bottles and more recycled plastic. But their pleas came to no avail.
This is 99% Invisible. I'm Roman Mars.
That's Roman Mars. And his podcast that's huge.
I swear to fulfill to the best of my ability and judgment this covenant.
A man must have a code.
That's pretty much the format for the show.
Ethical
really well produced.
Is that doctors first
nice voice, music, sound bites, stuff like that. What crap. When people think of design, they usually conjure up images of prominent, beautiful objects like a sleek, modern building or a stylish piece of furniture. But there's another world of design.
Physician, as a member of
one who rarely notice that quietly orchestrates our life. I'm not going to talk like him. 99% Invisible is a 4.5-minute long show on the radio station here in the Bay Area called KALW, public radio station. Actually, I think it has something to do with the school system of San Francisco. So he does this show and podcast, Roman Mars does, and he creates at night from his home in the East Bay. It has become something of a national hit. The show has uncovered the hidden world of design, revealing such stories as the murderous history of dentures, the faults and virtues of the cul-de-sac, and the free jazz of deteriorating escalators. He says, I wanted radio about design to be beautifully designed for radio, which I hadn't heard exactly. Each episode is densely layered with music, in addition to sounds like the turning pages of a book or the soft click of a vice grip. Mars studied plant population genetics before getting into radio. The design of the show is no accident. As a PhD student working in a lab, Mars often listened to public radio. Though he decided research wasn't for him, his love of radio grew to the point that after bouncing around various jobs, he decided he'd make a go at it as a career. In 2001, he talked to KALW's manager at the time into an unpaid internship and taught himself the basics of radio. He hosted a local show about zines and independent press called Invisible Ink. He says it was sort of my version of This American Life with a bit more punk. Invisible Ink led to a job at WBEZ in Chicago, and he ran its Third Coast International Audio Festival, a sort of Sundance for radio. After 3 years in Chicago, he and his family returned to the Bay Area, where he continued to work as a freelance producer, mostly behind the scenes. Then, Matt Martin, the general manager of KALW, who was a colleague of Mars during the early days at the station, had a meeting with the San Francisco chapter of the American Institute of Architects, and they discussed partnership on a short story. Martin, knowing Mars had developed a knack for launching new shows, contacted him to see what he thought of the idea. Mars liked it so much that he decided he wanted to host it himself, and Martin more or less let him run with the concept. This according to the East Bay Express. Mars says, I thought it was super cool. I knew how I could do the stories. I knew how I could get people's attention. I liked the idea. And I just lobbied for it to be more than a minute. And I got it to 4.5 minutes. In one listener favorite episode, Mars tells the story of the Plimsoll line, a simple circle with a line through it painted on the hulls of cargo ships near the water So it was to show if they've been overloaded. Before use of the symbol began in the 19th century, owners would intentionally overload older boats, claiming insurance money if they sank and killing hundreds in the process. It's a moving example of the high-stakes problem boiled down to an effective, beautiful solution. With each episode, Mars, who has no design background, has drawn a growing audience on the lookout themselves for these hidden artifacts. After being featured on Radiolab, a similar type produced show, 99% Invisible skyrocketed in popularity and now ranks in the top 5 podcasts in the design and arts category on iTunes. And it also has more than 1,800 5-star ratings on iTunes, which is more than nationally broadcast shows like NPR's Fresh Air with Terry Gross. Hi, this is Terry Gross, and I ask questions like this. And Planet Money with Zoe Chase! But Roman Mars was stretched thin between the show and other contracts because fans were so into the podcast. He started cutting 2 versions of each episode, a longer one for the podcast and a shorter one for KALW. And the podcasting service became more expensive as the downloads increased. Mars and his intern Sam Greenspan decided that if they were going to continue, they needed to raise money, so they started a Kickstarter campaign seeking $42,000 to secure a salary for Greenspan and hire him. They were also hiring more contributors and free up time to seek sponsors. Despite its popularity online, the show is seen as something of a square peg to radio stations, particularly because of its length and only a handful air it. Jake Shapiro, the executive director of Public Radio Exchange, which this show can be found on as well, though it really doesn't do this show any good. It is a non-profit internet marketplace for radio content, and it distributes 99% Invisible because it's so popular. Because stations that launch shows have limited funds and tend to be cautious with programming, avenues for new ideas are few and difficult, especially for the independent producers using unusual formats. But Shapiro said that's changing as new funding sources and platforms develop, and 99% Invisible is sending a message that shows like it can be successful. Well, bad medicine, bad business. The axis of measles. This article from the New York Observer says, no surprise to encounter ignorance and suspicion about modern medicine advances in the more backward regions of the planet. But in March in New York City, it was in the midst of a measles outbreak. Doctors said this rare outbreak was made possible thanks in part to the vogue among a certain set of sophisticated Americans not to vaccinate children. Like Boko Haram and the Taliban, the Western unvaxxed belief, they believe that contrary to all scientific research, vaccinations cause autism or that they can make children weaker and more vulnerable to other disorders. New York City, with its highly mobile community of global travelers and immigrants, is especially vulnerable to imported diseases that the Western world has, thanks to medical science, almost eradicated. But the unvaxxers can use modern courts, lawyers, and legislation to beat this and to force New York City schools to let their kids in. While they sometimes sue private schools, they really go after the public schools, where presumption in favor of universal education weakens any stand against them. It doesn't matter to these people that the City Department of Health, State Department of Health, and Centers for Disease Control and Prevention have all stated that vaccines are safe for use. The internet is full of websites and organizations devoted to their cause. One website called vaclib.org provides state-by-state advice to parents and promises to reveal the myth that vaccines are necessary, safe, and effective. That site's New York State page opens with a warning in capital letters and says, New York is probably the most difficult state in the U.S. in which to exercise your right to determine what goes into your body and your children's bodies. The NYC Schools Chancellor's Office has a regulation in place that allows school principals to remove unvaccinated children from school if another child has been diagnosed with a communicable disease such as measles or chicken pox. Those students are kept out of school until a few weeks after the final case has been diagnosed. But in 2012, parents of unvaccinated kids in Queens sued NYC over that rule. The lawyers representing both parents said that the regulation violates both state laws regarding vaccination as well as the free exercise clause of the First Amendment. Instead of celebrating the advances that we've made in medicine, celebrities like Jenny McCarthy promote the idea that vaccines are full of toxins that cause autism. In fact, a tiny dose of toxins is the whole point. Vaccines were invented when Edward Jenner noticed in 1798 that milkmaids who slopped around in barnyard filth didn't get the dreaded smallpox, since they had already had the less deadly cowpox, which was then common on farms. This article says they should be invited, these people that don't want to vaccinate their children, to start their own schools. Then their experiment in Dr. Flintstone's medicine can be carried out without our vaccinated kids and in-danger infants and immune-deficient adults as the control group. The rest of us can keep our distance. As we go outside of the last place on earth where we bring you Mike's Daily Podcast somewhere in Podcastro Valley, California, Doorslam.
And here's today's podcast picture.
The podcast picture is from Half Moon Bay. I was there recently. It was such a beautiful day. This is the time of year to go to Half Moon Bay. They have so much sun. It's summertime again. But they kind of don't get their summers because they get a lot of fog during the summer. But it's so beautiful this time of year. And they are known as the World Pumpkin Capital. They can grow pumpkins like nobody's business. In fact, I think the largest pumpkin of the year this year was grown there. So you can actually go this weekend. I think they are making the Great Gourd, where I think they take a big pumpkin and they carve it or something like that. But it's impossible to get to it, so I don't even know why I'm telling you about it, but it is so crowded to get there. When we were doing the Fabagoo Things to Do segment last year, Steve Hansen said you got to get up kind of early to beat all the traffic, because everybody wants to go there for the pumpkins and everything this time of year in October. So get up early and beat the traffic, and that is the show today.
Well, Mike, that was great. It was profound. We told Cheese to kiss off.
Yeah, Mike, it was really great, but I want to keep eating cheese because I love it. So you're not lactose intolerant? Oh, heck yeah, I am. All right, that's probably not a good thing that you're... Isn't there that movie Box Trolls that's out right now where there's a lactose intolerant villain or something?
Mike, I don't know. I just sit at home all day and look at my huge hat.
The next show, we are going to bring you the return of the much-loved feature Into an Interview. We'll be talking to a very special guest. Plus, we'll hear from Madame Rootabega, Valentino, and Bison Bentley.
Mike's Daily Podcast is written and produced and performed by Mike Matthews. His podcast is super easy to find. Download or listen to his show and read his blog at MIKES-DAILY-PODCAST.com. Email Mike now at MIKES-DAILY-PODCAST@gmail.com. See you tomorrow. Bye!
My root beer is like bad medicine.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's Brewmaster Jovi.
Oh, wow, groupies. Oh, boy.